is happening except with a vengeance, because it got worse than we thought, and it may, hopefully not, knock on wood, it may get worse. And if it gets worse, it's not just going to be about the direct impact that you can model. It's going to be about the consequences on investment, yes, but also on confidence. The uncertainty that is created by these trade tensions is very difficult to measure, is very difficult to establish in a model, in a formal projection, but it exists, and it's happening every day, and it's hurting us every day. And when...
Okay, is it just me, or does this guy remind you of, like, your grandfather's asshole drinking buddies?
You say, maybe in 6 months' time I will increase or not increase the tariffs for something as sensitive as cars, which will affect dozens of countries around the world.
Trade policy is simple. I'll solve it for everybody for all time right now. Unilateral free trade. That's it. Mic drop.
Then you're basically introducing a 6 months hiatus on investment decisions. Not only in one sector, i.e. cars, but in dozens of related sectors that depend on this very important trade. So yes, I would absolutely say it is because of the trade tensions and because we've chosen to resolve them by tariffs rather than by negotiation.
All right, Nadia, I'd like to pose the question to you as well. And talking about Europe, again, one of the big downgrades this year from the OECD.
Like, I think that guy had some solid points, but he's just such a clownish figure. It's hard to take him seriously.
Immune to some of the slowdown seen across more broadly speaking, within the Eurozone. What do you point that down to? Why is Spain a relative bright spot, and how long could it last for?
Yes, first of all, I think that it should come as no surprise that Europe is suffering very directly from this uncertainty and the trade tensions that Angel was referring to, because of the manufacture and export orientation of our economies, in particular Germany, but not only, and thus the direct impact that this kind of situation is having on investment and consumption in the sense of foreign consumption, trade, etc. So it has not come as a surprise. Let me be a bit less downbeat. I was Thursday and Friday.
I never would have placed her for a Spanish accent.
The atmosphere was a bit more optimistic, mildly optimistic than in previous meetings. The European Central Bank, the European Commission, the German Finance Ministry, all of them expect activity to pick up in the second part of this year, and the prospect is a bit more positive for 2020. Also, the OECD prospect is a bit more positive. So, I think that we have to, the glass may be half empty or half full, but let's hope that it may start to fill up again.
Jesus, this is the boringest summit ever.
In the coming months. Now, in this context, you're right to point out that Spain has proven to be extremely resilient. We have...
Is this all about trade? Because I already solved trade for you guys.
Such breach. And this is very important because security is at the heart of what we do. Security is at the heart of what a telecom operator, an operator in connectivity, has to provide to the customers, to the administrations that have given the concessions. So it's something that we cannot trade. If there is any fault, that would be binary. We would act immediately. And none of the operators around GSMA have found such type of breach. So this has to be factual. And the implications of any...
You can tell this guy's a serious intellectual because of how bald he is. He spent so much time thinking, it just burned out all his hair.
Implications on the cost that it would represent for customers across different geographies to have access to ultra high-speed connectivity. It would also delay those deployments. So we are ready to act and to propose to...
Is this what they do in the EU? Just sit around and talk about boring ass trade issues all day.
common certifying grounds to make sure that technology is safe and is
And pontificate about why they're never going to let anybody into the EU ever again.
the technological development as part of as a collateral damage.
To recap that, two very interesting points you raised. One is the cost of innovation, and here we talk about economic cost, but also in some cases a security cost. And the second point is that of global cooperation. So
Damn, that chick's hot.
I just want to continue and speak to Richard, sitting
At least they included some eye candy in this.
same panel 12 months ago, Richard. And back then we were just right at the beginning of this trade war between the US and China. The US had just applied steel and aluminium tariffs. Since then we've had another round of tariffs between the two sides.
And what tariffs?
But not everyone thinks that tariffs are bad. If you look at manufacturing jobs in the US, they've actually
Tariffs are
increased over the last 12 months. The president's stated aim was to create more manufacturing jobs back home. Given your line of expertise, would you...
Why should consumers be expected to pay higher prices just to subsidize domestic producers? Companies should be exposed to trade,
Times there's a perfect use.
to competition.
Tariffs can be used whenever somebody's violating an agreement and refuses to live by the norms.
Nobody wins a trade war.
Imposing tariffs can have a real positive effect on correct.
This is what they do in Canada, retaliatory tariffs. But then you're just letting your opponent dictate your strategy.
While there's been a lot made of the tariffs and the uncertainty and the outlook,
What if they just never reduce their tariffs? You're just going to leave your tariffs on in perpetuity?
first of all, I
Tariffs are bad. Unilateral free trade the whole way. That's it.
read of the facts that we currently face out there. It says global economic growth is going to slow and doesn't look like it's going to be picking up. And you, particularly on how you looked at the trade uncertainty and said that's the real reason. But let me pose another reason, if you wouldn't mind. The global economy, the demand is 56% driven by consumer spending. In the United States, the economy is 72% driven by consumer spending. And while the report, the outlook, spends a lot of time talking about weak demand from the business sector, low orders for industrial products and important capital components like semiconductors and fixed investment, there's very, very little attention paid to consumer demand. The outlook points to rising labor participation and rising employment, but pays little attention to labor's share of the economy. And the reality is that labor's share of the economy has fallen precisely because while productivity was rising, wages were not rising. In fact, in the United States, 62% of people haven't seen a raise in over a year. And so demand, if 50...
He's probably referring to this dog shit graph produced by the Economic Policy Institute. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Economic Policy Institute, but they are just absolute garbage. So there's a couple problems with this graph. You'll note that it talks about hourly compensation. So a big part of compensation growth in the United States in this time period has been healthcare costs. So if you look at total compensation versus net productivity, or rather if you look at total compensation versus wages, you see a dramatic difference. And the second problem was the way that they calculate inflation, because when you're dealing with a 70-year period, you need to inflate or deflate depending on which way you're going. And so once you account for the methodology they used for calculating inflation, you look at total compensation as opposed to hourly wages, And you see that productivity and compensation are tracking quite directly.
because wages are stagnant or falling. Or in the United States, 72% can't participate because wages are standing or falling. We have to do something about that. At some point,
That's not true. Wages have been growing steadily.
it's going to be driven by working people getting their fair share. And I was proud to hear the minister talk about.
Wages could be growing faster than they are, but they've been growing.
On the future of work and the attention you've paid to providing collective bargaining so that workers can get a fair share. The reality is, though, at some point, wages are going to have to rise faster than productivity if we're going to close the inequality gap and restore healthy demand. And so,
But if you really want wages to rise faster, then what we need is less government spending, less taxes. What we need is sound money, an end to central banking. That's the recipe for high wages. Unions have nothing to do with it. You have to, if you want workers to be paid more, they have to be more productive. You need more savings, more reinvestment in the economy so that there's a greater capital stock, so that there's more capital per person, and people become they get higher wages. The problem right now is taxes are so high, there's so much government spending in the economy that there's no room for the economy to grow. When you've got constant inflation from the central bank, that's incentivizing debt, and that's punishing savers. So who's going to save? Who's going to invest? But for a healthy economy in the long run, you need savings and investment. So what we really need is to radically decrease the size and scope of the state.
It's truly an important part of the, so is workers' wages and labor's share of the economy. And because without it, I think those two dimensions, 56% of the global economy and 72% of the U.S. economy can't participate at healthy levels.
Just a quick follow-up to that, Richard. How would you say workers are today versus exactly 12 months ago when we were sitting here having this conversation?
Well, they haven't gotten a raise even though productivity is going up and inflation's going up, so they sit backwards. They're not moving forward. In fact, at the height of the business cycle in the United States, wages did not keep up with inflation-adjusted productivity. So wages fell behind at the top of the business cycle, and inequality expanded during that period of time. That means that we have to pay more attention to labor's share of the economy and income.
Yeah, we're also in that labor market. I agree, and I partly disagree. But
Here's the thing about the market economy is everybody gets paid basically what they contribute. That's how it works. So workers get paid basically their productivity, how much they contribute to the productive process, how much their labor contributes. So long as you have a reasonably competitive labor market, like most developed economies, there's not really that much room for workers to get paid more under the economic conditions as they exist today. People imagine that they could just establish things by government fiat, but there are economic laws that you ignore at your own peril. But there's one thing we can do for workers immediately is stop taxing their paychecks. Why are we taking money off the working class paychecks? If we want them to have more money, then stop taking their money. That would be, number one. You look at Social Security contributions, that's not really a savings program. That's a tax on workers and a welfare payment to old people. And that disproportionately affects poor workers. I mean, anybody who's making less than like 60,000 a year shouldn't pay anything in taxes whatsoever. That would make it a lot easier. Uh, and that's what they would do if the intent was for the state to transfer wealth from high income people to low income people. But that's not the intent. The intent is to transfer wealth from the economic class to the political class. This is quite a different thing entirely. Well, a lot of government policies are justified as being on behalf of the poor. In reality, everything is just set up to benefit the political class, of which these guys here are no doubt prime representatives.
Wage increases at around 3%. A bigger issue we see is, call it, the multi-forms of labor, where we do see people being in sort of a gray zone, being left behind in sort of bogus self-employment, gig economy, and you know that plays on the average.
Yeah, why do people go for these gig economy jobs, or this what does he call it, bogus self-employment? It's because the official labor market is so regulated that it's difficult for people to find work there. Furthermore, a lot of people like the flexibility of being a freelancer, of being self-employed or working in the gig economy. You choose what hours you work, you choose what hours you don't. That suits many people a lot better. You know, it's also more in line with agency costs. If you're working a freelancer and you're getting paid piecework, then if you have a huge rush of productivity, you get it done, you're getting paid, beautiful. You know, if you're lazing about, you're not doing any work, you're not getting paid, well, that's how it should be, right? So there's nothing wrong with the freelance model, and a lot of the time with the gig economy, you know, you've got regulations that are making it difficult for people to find employment, and this is sort of a means that the market found away from the interventions that are imposed in the labor market.
And the informal work, and that's a big issue. So I think we need to, and that's also in the future of work, we need to embrace these multi-forms of labor, and we need to invest in people and also in their salaries and make them insured and be able to have a mortgage even though they're not employed in what's still called, but I think that's old, irregular jobs. So I do think that together with trade unions and companies, we need to create a situation where everybody has a seat at the table. And we need to, in that sense, reinvent social dialogue, not just for the people who are in a regular job, but also people who are in other forms of job, because that's increasing to above 20% of the total workforce, and we need them and we need to skill them.
We would embrace that wholeheartedly. In the United States, only 12.5% of the workforce is actually represented by a union. Billions of dollars are spent every year by employers to prevent workers from having that voice and to be able to engage in collective bargaining and having that social dialogue. And unfortunately, when we find progressive companies coming from Europe, Scandinavia, and other places around the world that do have that engagement and social dialogue with their workers, when they reach the U.S., they get amnesia. They forget about all of that great dialogue and investing in workers, and instead of having us, treating us like assets to be invested in, they treat us as costs to be cut.
On the other hand, American wages are way higher than anywhere else in the world.
From Europe and Scandinavia, so that's good.
Excellent. Minister, I'd like to bring it back to you. And I'm quoting off the top of my head here, but I read on the second or third page of the Economic Outlook, I thought there was a very interesting line about Europe. And there was a proposal by the OECD, and they said that if Europe engages in structural reforms to the tune of about 0.2% a year for the next couple of years, and loosens fiscal spending just to the tune of 0.5 percentage point over the next 3 years, that could be growth additive of 1% over the next 3 years, I think, as well, if I'm misquoting. But the point is, it doesn't take that much. You just need to do a little bit on the structural reform side, perhaps spend a little bit more, and you are looking at GDP potential, lifting GDP potential by about 1%. Why is there so much hesitation in Europe to do that?
It's a very good question. Thank you very much. I mean, the structural reform front, I think, is easier to deal with because there is a widespread agreement that we need to, for example, embrace the ecological transition. I think that we cannot have an ostrich approach here of trying to ignore it and then wake up one day and realize that we're too late. And if we, I mean, we in this room, I'm sorry to say, we are of a certain age, but kids who are 14, 15, they're not going to allow us not to take measures now because it's their future, and they're very well aware of that. So I think that we need to drive this process. At least in Spain, we're absolutely determined to drive this process and to transform the challenge also into an opportunity. New jobs, large investment, you know, new opportunities, circular economy, etc. That's one area. But obviously, the digital transformation is also requiring us to do structural reforms in terms of education, upskilling, you were referring to it, long life learning, the new types of jobs. We need to do our structural reforms in the sense of seeing that all our systems are adjusted to new forms of relationship and a new social contract. So I think that there's widespread agreement that we need to do them. But there are different...
So I really don't like the GDP statistic. I specifically don't like the GDP statistic as a measure of the economy or of economic health. So there's really no way you can measure the health of the economy. Furthermore, you don't really need to. You don't need to measure the health of the economy because we already know what the best policies are, which is drastic reductions to government spending and taxes, you know, extreme limited government. That's the best economic system, laissez-faire. That's the best economic system for any country at any stage of development. Doesn't matter. Whatever's going on. So we've already got that answer. So first, what is GDP, or gross domestic product? So GDP is the final value of all goods and services produced in the economy over a given year. So this is calculated through adding up private consumption, gross private investment, government spending, and then the balance between exports and imports. In other words, it's all the money that's spent in the country in a given year. So one big problem with GDP is it doesn't differentiate between different types of spending. So if a business goes out and hires 10 employees and they're all working hard, producing wealth for that firm's prospering as a result, that's counted the exact same as if the government hires 10 employees to sit in a room and push papers around doing nothing, producing no real wealth. In both scenarios, GDP goes up because there's more spending. But in scenario 1, wealth is being produced. In scenario 2, wealth is being consumed. And the problem with GDP is it's based on the fallacy that consumption drives the economy. Of course, this is intuitively wrong. You know that in your own personal financial life, consumption does not drive your personal finances, your personal economy. Earning an income does, right? And then however much you consume decreases your wealth. Critics will say that it's different when it comes to the government, but it's really not, or rather when it comes to the economy as a whole. Now, I'm not going to say that people should save rather than consume, because that's not my place. I have no idea whether another individual should save or consume their income. I'm not that individual. I don't know what their goals are. I don't know what their means are. That's for them to decide. Only they can decide that. But in terms of the long-term health of the economy, there's absolutely nothing wrong with people saving their money. Savings is, in fact, the cornerstone of economic growth, because savings gets reinvested and becomes more capital, which makes labor more productive. makes our economy as a whole stronger. And it really doesn't matter if that investment occurs immediately or the savings lasts for a long time before it's invested, because untapped savings is just latent investment. Or conversely, if all savings were invested, there would be no more savings for other projects. So it's fine for people to just save and wait for a good investment. It's even fine for people to just save cash. So the great thing about the economy is there's really no wrong choices when it comes to an individual spending their money. So the problem with the GDP statistic is that people take it as an article of faith that GDP equals the health of the economy. And then politicians start governing on the basis of making GDP go up. The other thing is that loose monetary policy can appear to make GDP go up, can appear to make the economy grow, but that's an illusion. And in fact, all you're doing is setting the stage for the bubble to burst. So I reject the premise of the interviewer's question, this idea that, oh, you just spend, another 0.5%, GDP is going to grow up 1%. I think it's all based on a fundamentally flawed understanding of how the economy works. If the people of Spain or any other country want good long-term economic growth, then what they have to do is adopt extreme austerity. They need massive reductions in government spending, the sale of government assets, elimination of taxes, whole cloth. You gotta look at serious reforms, and we need to return to the gold standard, or at the very least adopt open competition amongst currencies, eliminate the capital gains on gold and silver so they can be used as specie.
Let's see, but that I don't think is such a contentious front. Now, when it comes to fiscal policy...
Okay, but what about global warming? I really don't think that the danger of global warming is as big as people say. Sure, we've seen, 1 degree of warming, but so far it's also been concentrated in colder, arid regions where warming stands to benefit as much as harm. If you look at the statistics on deaths from climate disasters, they've been going down dramatically over the last 100 years because of improved building conditions and probably superior detection and alert systems as well, large-scale humanitarian efforts. And if we have to give the UN their due there, if you look at the figures on fatalities caused by temperature, cold is 10 times as deadly as the heat. People are saying that climate change is going to exacerbate that, make things colder as well as hotter. That doesn't make a lot of sense. You would think if it's warming, then overall it's going to be less cold, even if there are still some extreme cold moments. That's what warmer means. But yeah, we should be prepared to mitigate some of the worst case scenarios, and absolutely we should be prepared to evacuate any climate refugees, get them resettled. I've been a supporter of open borders for a long time. I don't think that it's something we should ignore. We should definitely continue to measure the temperature, and also to critically evaluate a lot of the data. A lot of the historical temperature is based on a lot of guesswork that's not necessarily that accurate. Obviously, today we're pretty good at measuring the temperature, but when they're looking back, 500 years, they're using some very dubious sources, and then balancing out all the errors. They say, well, we add up 4 wrong answers and we get 1 right answer. Is that the proper methodology, or is it just guesswork? I'd much rather our planet be warming than cooling. We're already in an ice age. This is not the norm necessarily. The Earth has gone through long periods without glaciers. But don't get me wrong. I think we should work to reduce CO2 emissions. I've never had a car. I'd like to think I keep my CO2 emissions pretty low. Yeah, absolutely. We need to look into more working from home, more bicycles. We should stop subsidizing automobile drivers through socialized roads. I mean, if you look at it, government provided roads for free are a massive subsidy to automobile drivers. But most importantly, we're going to have technology that replaces gasoline and other emissions causing energy sources pretty soon. You look at the breakneck pace of technology. You know, we've got AI now. Probably should have invested more in nuclear. We got wind and solar. The other thing being, we're probably going to get more reliant on energy in the near future. So, plus, you know, we've got these Hail Mary solutions like putting up space mirrors to block out some of the sun. Bill Gates has been suggesting that. I actually think it's a pretty smart idea. I mean, you know, don't block it all out, but if you can block out 2 to 3%, that might help alleviate the problem, you know. You don't even have to block it out. You're just bouncing some of it off or whatever. We can put these up, you know, put up 10, 20, see what happens. If it's working, you know, put up 100. We don't have to go all the way back to a centigrade below. I think the temperature we're at right now is all right. Maybe another half a degree. See what happens. Maybe we can set up some sort of global thermostat situation. I mean, or we could say, you know, YOLO, let's see what 5 degrees hotter feels like. Turn those suckers back, make it an amplification device. I mean, everybody loves vacationing in Cancun, so why don't we make New York the next Cancun? Well, I think what this really comes down to is the narrative that's so important for intellectuals, which is that humanity is fundamentally in need of saving by the intellectuals, that they need to step in and intervene and save humanity. And as Mencken said, the urge to save humanity is almost always a false front for the urge to rule humanity. And that's really what these We Forum, Davos crowd want, is they want to enshrine their own benevolent, perpetual leadership of the human race. They don't want any challenge to their authoritarian rule.
Setting the rules is very complicated, and changing them is even more so, because there are so many different views on how to articulate fiscal policy at the national level, and also different views on how the euro should play as a supporting factor, as a stabilizing factor to support national budgets in providing this stable framework, and fiscal policy having a somewhat counter-cyclical role. Different views on these, but I think that we're making progress, and I think that more important than changing the rules is applying them in a smart manner, ensuring that we continue to reduce fiscal deficits because we need fiscal space, but we do not endanger growth. Insofar as Spain is concerned, we have sent to the European institutions a stability program which very clearly along those lines. We want to be ambitious in reducing deficits and sovereign debt compared to GDP. We need to create that fiscal space, but we also need to keep growth robust, employment creation robust, and we need to protect our welfare state. I think that, as I was saying before, and I think that's maybe the the key message that I see more and more coming from also international institutions is you also need to ensure that welfare and citizens' well-being is taken care of, because otherwise we're going to find ourselves unable to do these structural reforms which are needed if we want to make future a success, you know, and this whole transformation a success for the next generations.
Mr. Gurria, I'd like to pose the question to you as well. Just from the angle of global cooperation, how important is it to make these decisions through a multilateral framework as opposed to each country going at it alone?
We're talking about international trade. How do you deal with international trade if not internationally? We're talking about
Touche, Angel.
how do you deal with a global issue if not globally, with global solutions, with multilateral solutions? This is a world that has been integrated now practically fully with digital. I mean, it's going to become a little wrapper, you know. It's all going to be contained in a handful. How can you not integrate the solutions? So basically, what we're doing is we're going suboptimal knowingly. Because global issues, trade, yes, but how about investment flows? How about climate? How about migration? They're just like pandemics. They don't know. Viruses don't know the border. You know, they don't stop at the border. Huh?
Who the hell is this guy? Okay, I am not at all surprised that he is, or rather was, Mexican. He's got a very Mexican way of communicating. Very passionate. Like two buddies at a bar, you know, in a really good conversation. Spoke French, English, Portuguese, Italian, and German. That's pretty impressive. Bachelor's in economics from University of Mexico, and then post-grad at Leeds and Harvard.